So now let's start building that application. So I've opened a folder as the number guessing game, and inside that what we need to do is now we need to create a new file. It would be the index.html. So this would be the root file of our application, which is the index.html. And here what we need to do is now we need to just create a basic structure of the HTML document. So for that we can just type the HTML, and then there would be three options of the HTML, basic HTML, and the :5 and the XML. But we would select the HTML5 because we need to create the HTML5 document. And now what we need to do, so for the number guessing game, the first thing is that we need the heading inside the application. So we can have the h1 tag, and this can be the guess the number. So this would be the heading. And after that what we need to do is now we need to just create another h element. So we can have a h5, and this will be having a guess any number from, it can be 1 to 100. So we will accept the numbers only from the 1 to 100. So this will be the h5 element. And after that what we need to do, we can just save, and then we can just open this file inside this Chrome. So we can just right click on the index.html, and then we can just click on the copy path, and then we can just move on to any of the browsers, and then we can just paste the document link. And then you can see now we have the guess the number game, and here we have the guess the number from 1 to 100. And after that now we need to create the form to accept any number. So for that we can just create another tag, like it can be the form tag, and we can remove the action because we don't need them at all. And after that what we need to do is we need just a label or the inputs. So we can just have here the label first. So the label HTML4 will be equals to the number. So it can be the input value, so it can be the value. And after that what we need to do is now we need to add here the label. For that, like it can be enter the number between 1 to 100. And after that what we need to do, so after the label now we can just create an input tag. So we can have the input, and we can have the type equals to, we can have the tel. And after that what we need to do, and then we can just give this input element a unique ID. So we can have ID would be equals to the value. So this will be the input value. And after that what we need to do is now we can just save, and we can also create the button to submit the form. So we can have the button for the submit. So we can have a button type equals to the submit. So with the type equals to the submit, so whenever we will just enter inside this form, whenever we will press the enter, so the form will be auto submitted. So we have the button type equals to the submit, and inside that we can just provide the value, like we can have a check. And now if we now save, if we now move on to the application, and here you can see now we have the enter the number between 1 to 100, and then we have the text box. And you can see once we will just click on the check, then you can see the document URL will change. So if we now remove the question mark, if we now just click on the check, so now you can see the form is now submitting, and now we are getting the URL as well. And after that what we need to do is now we need to just create the functionality. So for this, so the form is added, and now we need to create the functionality to check all of the things. And after the form what we need to do is now we need to create the JavaScript file. So for that we can just create the JavaScript file. So it can be the script.js. So this will handle all of the things like generating the random number, getting the values of that form, and adding the event listeners and all. So in the script.js what we need to do, so the first thing we need to add the document dot query selector. So first thing is we want to get this form element. So we can just get the form element from the query selector, and inside that once we will get the form, and then it will refer to the form. And after that we can just have here the function of the onSubmit. So in the form we have the function of the onSubmit, which will be a function which will contain the event as well of the submit event. And after that we can just create this function. So for the onSubmit function of the document, this function will be handling the onSubmit state of the document. So whenever we'll submit the form, so this function will be then running. So we can just create the function as well, but here I've created the ES6 function. And after that the first thing that we need to do is we need to just run the prevent default function. So with the prevent default, and the form will not refresh the page. So as we have seen inside the document, if we just click on the check, then the document reloads as well because it has entered the form. But if we add here the event.prevent default, so the form will not be refreshed, so the page will not be refreshed. And after that what we need to do is now we need to get the value of that input. So for getting that value we can just have the const, we can have here the value, or we can have here the input value will be equals to, we can just refer to that input element from the ID. So we can have document dot get element by ID, and with the ID we need to provide the ID of that input. So we can just check the ID of that input. So we have the ID equals to the value. So we can just move on, and then we can just declare the value. And after that, to get the actual value, we can just have here the value with that. So we have the value with that in the document.getElementById function. So it will give you the actual value of that input. So now we can just save. And now what we need to do is now we need to add the validation as well. Like we can have here the input value. So we can have there, if we don't have the input value, then what we need to do is now we need to just return. Or else what we need to do, so we can just log the value as of now. So we can have the log of the input value. So after that, what we need to do is now we need to link this script file into the index.html as well. So for that, we can just move on at the end of the body tag, and then we can just refer the script source will be equals to the script.js. So this will handle the scripts of the document. So we can now refresh the page, and then we can remove the question mark as well. And now we can remove this as well. So now we can just check here. So if we now just provide any number inside that, so you can move on to the inspect as well in the console window to check if everything is printing or not. So after that, if we just add any number, like I will add 122. So if I just click on the check, so now you can see now we got the value of the 122. So now we are getting the value of the form as well. So we can add any number like 10, and once you will just enter anything, so that will also work because we have added the input type equals to the submit as well. So the form event will be dispatched whenever we enter anything. So we can just press enter as well to get the values of that. And now what we need to do, so after the check, now we need to check that number. So the functionality would be the form will give you a number. So the user will give you a number, and then you need to generate a random number from 1 to 100. And then you need to check if that input value is equals to the number, then the user will win the game. And if not, then the user will lose the game. So for that, what we need to do is first you need to generate a random number. So we can just create a function, like it can be the const random number generator. So this will be a function. And after that, what we need to do is now we need to just create here the random number. So how we can create that? So we can just have the const can be the number will be equals to, so we have a function inside the math class of the JavaScript. So we can just refer to the math, and then we have the static function of the math.random. So we have the static class math.random. With that, we can just create a random number, but the math.random creates a random number only from the 0 to 1. So for getting the number from the 0 to 100, what we need to do is now we need to just multiply the number into the 100. So this will give you the actual number with that, but the math.randoms give you the number between the 0 to 1. So it will give you the pseudo random number between the 0 to 1. So the number would be inside the decimal format. So we don't need the number inside the decimal because the user will not give you the number inside the decimal. So for that, you can just call here the math.floor as well, which is also a static function. So you can just call here the math.floor, and then what will it do? So the floor give you the actual value. So what do I mean? So if I will now move on to the inspect, if I will now move on to the console, so if I will now just call here the math.floor, and if I will now give there the decimal value like float values, like I can give you a 0.5, and then you will see it will give you the roundabout value. So it will give you the round value after the decimal point or before the decimal point. Like if you will just write the math.floor, and if you will give the number as the 19.5, then it will give you the number as the 19. And same for the 20 as well. If you will just give any number as the math.floor, and it will give you the, you can just add here the 1.1, and then it will give you the value of that 1. So that's the point of the math.floor. So it will give you the roundabout value. So this will be the random number that we need to create. So we have the math.floor and the math.random into the 100. So if we just copy this, and if we just run it inside the console, like we have the math.random into 100, and there you can see now we got the 96, now we got the 20, now we got the 97, we got the 99, we got the 96 again, we got the 14, we got the 87. So we will get the number from the 0 to 100 with that. So now we can just, so now we have this number, and after that, for the random number, we can just return that number as well. So we can now return this number. So we will return this number, and after that, now we can just get their number as well. So we can just get the const the random number will be equals to, we will get here the random number generator. So it will give you the random number with that. So now we have the random number with that. And now what we need to do is now we need to just check if we have the number. So now we need to just check the actual logic of that application. So now we can remove the console.log as well. So now we have the random number, and now we need to just verify if the entered value, if the input value is equals to the random number. So we can have the if, then we can just convert this value, input value, into the number as well, because this will give you the value inside the string. So you can have the number as the input value. If it is equals to the number, or it can be a random number, then we will win the game. So then what we need to do is, now we can just show anything like a result inside that. So for the result, we can move on to the index.html, and after the form we can just have here the paragraph tag, and then we can just provide here the id, and the id would be equals to, we can give the id of the result. So we have the id equals to the result, and now we need to move on to the script.js, and here what we need to do is, now we can just have the document dot get element by id, and it can be the result, and then we can have here the dot inner html, and it would be equals to, so we can give the html like you guess the number right. So that will be the message, and then we can add the else case as well. So in the else, so if the actual number is not the input value, so we can just copy that again, and then we can just move on to the else part, and here we can just write this logic. If the input value is not equals to the random number, then we can write the you guessed the number wrong, and we can just write here the actual number is, and then we can just provide the number as well, like that would be the random number. So we have the random number. So if we now save, if we now move on to the application, we can refresh the page, and if we now just enter any number between 1 to 100, like I will add 55, so we can have 55. So if we now just click on the check, so now you can see you guessed the number wrong, and the actual number is the 65. So now we are getting the result as well. So everything is working perfectly fine. So now we have created the logic of this application as well, and this logic is working perfectly fine. And now we can enter any number like 12, so we can just have the, so again we have the you guessed the number wrong, actual number is 37, and then we can just change to the 45, and then again the 65, then we can just have the 10, we can just have 97, we can have here the 90, the number is 71, and we can have here the 61 as well, so the number is 32. So now this game is completed, and now we have created the functionality of the guess the number game. And now what we can do is, now we can just provide some more validations, like, so now we can just create a functionality in which what we can do is, if the number was near about that the actual number, then we can just show the messages. So for that we can just move on again to the document, and here inside the else part, what we need to do, so we can just check here another if check. So after that we can have another if check, like the if, we can have here the number again, the input value. So if the input value, I think plus, we can give the roundabout of the plus 20, so we can have here the input value plus 10, so is greater than equals to the random number. So we have this functionality. So what we are checking inside the if case, so what we are doing here is, now we are just checking an if case. So if the number input value, so if the input value plus 10 is greater than the random number, like if there was a very less difference, then we can just write another message. So for another message, what we can do is, now we can just move on to the index.html, and then we can just create another paragraph tag with the id equals to the message. So we can add any message with that. So with the message, we can have here the document dot get element by id. So we can have the get element by id equals to the message, and then we can have here the dot inner html again would be equals to, so we can have the message as you were near but a little higher. So we have this validation check with that, and after that what we need to do is, now we can just check another if case as well. So we can have the else if, so we can have the else if block, and if the else if, like if the number, again the input value minus 10, so now we can just check the negative values. So if the input value minus 10 was less than equals to the number, so we can just check minus 10 was less than equals to the random number. So we can just copy that document dot get element by id, and then we can just paste here, and then we can have the you were near but a little lower. So we have this message. So here we have this functionality. So if we now save, if we now just refresh the application once again, and then we can just check again. So if we just provide any number, like we can just provide the 22, and then you can see we were a little bit lower, and the number was 57, and then we can just check with any other number, like we can provide the number as in 98, and then you can see we have the 35, and then we have a message as you are near but a little higher, and after that we can just provide the number as the 50 to check if we are correct or not, and then again we got viewer near but a little lower, and then we can just check again a lower, and then we have the higher, and then we have the lower. So now our functionality is working perfectly fine. So now we have just completed the functionality of this game. And now what we can do as the final step, so we can just provide some stylings for this application. So for that we can just create another file, and it can be the style.css. and inside that what we can do, so first we need to just link this file. So we need to move on to the index.html, and here we can just provide the link and with the href, so with the link, and then we need to provide the reference. So we need to provide the reference of the style.css. so we have this reference, and now we can just provide the body tag. So we can have the body, and then we can have the margin equals to the 0. So now we don't have any margin. So if we now save, so now you can see now we don't have any margin from any of the sides. And now what we need to do is now we can just change the background as the alias blue. So this will be the new background color. So now this color will look good. And after that we can just target the h1 element. So we can have the h1 element, and then we can have the text align into the center. So the text would be inside the center. So we have the guess the number, and then we can just target the h5 element as well. So again this would also have the text align into the center. So we all need this as well into the center. And I think the font size is not so big, so we can just have here the font size, or we can just change the element as well, but I will not just define the font size, would be because 20 pixels. So if we now save, so now we have the font size of the 20 pixels. And now what we need to do is now we need to move on to the form. So the form would be having something like padding, would be equal to the 10 pixels. And after that we can just provide the margin as well for the form. So we can have the margin of something around 10 pixels again. So if we now save, so now we have the margins of that form as well. And then I think we can just provide the display as well to the flex. So we can have display as the flex, and then we can have the flex direction into the column. So if we now save, so now we have this functionality of that form. And then we can just provide the width as well to the form. So we can have the width of something around 500 pixels. So if we now save, so now we have this width, and then we can just provide here some justify content. So we can now justify content into the center. So the form should be aligned inside the center, and then we can have the align items into the center. So this will be in the center of the web page. And after that we can just change the margin as well. So instead of the 10 pixels, so we can just provide the auto. So if we now save, so now you can see, so now we are aligned into the center of that web page as well. And then we can have the justify content as the center, and then we can just target the input element of the form. So we can have the form and the input, and with the input what we need to do, so we can just have the padding of something around 10 pixels, and then we can have the margin of the 5 pixels from all of the sides. So if we now save, so now you can see now we have some padding and the margin for the inputs. And then for the button as well we can just provide some styling. So we can have the form and the button tag of the form, and then we can just provide the border radius. So it can be 10 pixels, and then we can have the padding again of the 6 pixels something about. And then we can just save, and then you can see we can refresh, and then we have the check, and then we can just have here the margin as well of the 2 pixels from all of these sides. So now we have the margin as well, and then we can just increase the width of the button as well. So we have the width of the 100 pixels. So if we now save, so now we have the width of the 100 pixels of this button, and here we can see now we have to enter the number between 1 to 100. And then we can provide the styling for the label as well, I think. So we have the form label, and then for the label we can have the font size would be equal to this 20 pixels. So if we now save, so now we have to enter the number between 1 to 100, and then we can enter any number, and then we will just check that number. So if we enter any number like 23, and then if we just click on the check, now we will get that number. So we have the, you guessed the number wrong, the actual number was 13, and we were a little bit higher. So we can just get these text as well into the center. So we can just move on to the paragraph text, and then it will be applied to the all the paragraphs. So we can have the text line into the center. So if we now save, if we now just check any number again, 21, so we have the, you guessed the number wrong, the actual number was 81. And now what we can do is now we can just add an icon as well, like the correct or wrong icon. So for that we can just move on to the index.html, and here we can just declare another paragraph tag. This would be the id equals to, we can give the id of that icon. So now after that what we need to do is now we need to move on to the script.js, and then once we will just correct the right number, then we can just target that paragraph tag of the icon, and then we can just add that icon. So for the icon we can use the HTML entities. So you can just get any HTML entity from the Google, so it is available for free, and then you can add any HTML entity for that. So the HTML entity just contain a hex number, and it will just create an icon or the emoji with that. So we can have the document dot get element by id, and then we can have the id of that icon, and then dot inner HTML. So because the inner HTML would be equals to that hex number. So we can have the end. So we can have the side of the end, and then we can have the hash, and then we can have the 10003. So this will give the correct icon, and after that we can just move on. And else if the result was wrong, and then we can just give a different HTML entity code. So with that we can just give there the hash 1. We can have here the 0006. So we can have the 0006. So this will be the icon with that. So if we now save, if we now refresh the page, so we can have the number like 22. So now you can see now we got this icon as well. So now we have this icon. You guess the number wrong, and if the number was correct, then we will just get the tick icon. So now I will show you with the hard-coded value. So if we just provided the number would be equals to, we can give the number of the 22. And if we just refresh the page, and if we give the number of the 22, then if we just click on the check, so now you can see you guessed the number right. So now we got this icon. So now we are getting the icons as well. So now we can just change this to the random number generator only. So now we can just check as well, like the 22. So now you can see you guessed the number wrong, and the actual number is 40. And then we can just change the color of that inner HTML as well. So we can have the document.icon dot, we can have the style dot color. We can have the color equals to the red. So this will have the color equals to the red, and here it will just have here a different color. So here we will have the color equals to the green. So if we now save, if we now refresh the application, and then if we just add anything with that, so now you can see now we got the icon as well, like the you guessed the number wrong, and the actual number is 51, and then you were near but a little bit lower. So everything is working perfectly fine. So now we have completed this project. So I hope you have learned a lot from this project as well. So that's it for this video.